Welcome back children to yet another session. In the last video we learned about the economic reforms and the new economic policy. We just learned about one policy which was adopted under the new economic policy. There are three policies which were adopted under the new economic policy, that is liberalization, globalization and privatization. And we finished with liberalization. And under liberalization, we learned about industrial sector reforms, tax reforms, foreign exchange reforms, and financial sector reforms. And you may remember how RBI has changed its role from a regulator to a facilitator. So we finished with liberalization, and the next element of the new economic policy is privatization. Now let us move on to privatization. What is meant by privatization? Let us see the definition written for privatization. Privatization means transfer of ownership or management and control of the public sector enterprises to the entrepreneurs in the private sector. Now we learned during the planning period what was a major defect which was associated with the government undertakings, public sector undertakings. Most of the public sector undertakings were running at a loss, and since it was undertaken by the government, there was no other way to shut down, and therefore it was running at a loss. So that was a condition. So because of that, so many financial crises government had to meet. So during the reform period, government decided to give more importance to the private sectors. So new economic policy, mainly emphasizes on giving more freedom to the private sector enterprises, because when India signed with the World Bank and the IMF for the financial help, this was the most important point that was stressed. Freedom for the private sector enterprises. So privatization refers to the transfer of ownership. Transfer of ownership. What is meant by transfer of ownership? Ownership is transferred. So whose ownership? Government ownership. Government undertaking is going to get transferred to the entrepreneurs or the business people of private sectors. That is known as privatization. So let us read the definition once again. It means transfer of ownership, management. Not only ownership, management. For the running, management is necessary, right? Management and control of what? The public sector enterprises. Public sector enterprises means what? Government. Public sector enterprises means what? Which is owned by the government. So transfer of ownership, management as well as control of public sector enterprises to whom? The entrepreneurs in the private sector. So government is trying to transfer the ownership, control and management of its undertakings to whom? The entrepreneurs of the private sector. So some areas government might find difficult to survive or to control by itself. So in such cases, government can hand over the ownership, management and control to private enterprises with the hope that the private investors can run those business profitably. Because you may remember the scholars argued that some of the areas such as hotel and telecommunication, all those could have been done properly by the private sector during the planning period if government was giving the control to the private sectors. You may remember the topic which I have discussed in the second chapter. So as per that, in the new economic policy, government is trying to transfer the ownership, management and control to the private sector enterprises with the hope that it can run efficiently. So whenever the government is doing this kind of privatization, that means whenever the government is transferring the ownership, management and control to the private sector enterprises, it has some objective. Any action has got an objective behind it. Now let us see what was the main objective of the government behind that. As per the new economic policy, with the process of privatization, what was the objective behind that? What was the objective? Objectives: to improve the financial stability. This can be connected to the problems which was faced by the government sector during the planning period. I told you, during the planning period, most of the undertakings were under the control of the government. So government had to run that even if it was facing a loss, as it was government sector undertakings. So now, when the ownership is now transferred to the private sectors, they can manage it properly by their own decisions and control. So with the hope, the government has done the privatization. So the main objective of the government behind this privatization is to maintain the financial stability. So government is transferring the ownership with the hope that the private sector enterprises can run those areas properly and efficiently than the government. So to maintain the financial, to improve the financial stability and to promote modernization. Modernization, you have learned what is meant by modernization. Change in the social outlook as well as adoption of new technology. Definitely the private sector enterprises will definitely adopt for a new technology. So with the adoption of new technology, what will happen? Normally the process of modernization will happen. So this was the objective of the government behind privatization. The two objectives were to improve the financial stability. That means the turnover of the private enterprises will be more than the government enterprises. And the second objective was modernization. The private enterprises will adopt for new technology. Now, the next topic is privatization can be done in two ways. In two ways the privatization can be done. Which are the two ways in which the privatization can be done? The first method is transfer of ownership and management of public sector companies owned by the government to private sector. As per the definition what we have explained, transferring the ownership, management and control of the government enterprises straight away to the private sector enterprises. This is one method of doing the privatization. As per the definition what we have explained, the same thing is one way in which privatization can be done. Now what is the second method in which the privatization can be done? Selling a part of equity or share of the public sector undertakings to the general public. You are very much familiar with this term. You have learned this in government budget and economy, the term disinvestment. I hope you can recollect the term disinvestment. So what is meant by disinvestment? Selling a part of its share or equity by the government sector enterprises to the general public. How? In the form of shares or bond. So whenever government is in need of money, it will sell that to the public in the form of shares and bonds so that it will get the money. So people also will be interested to buy these in the form of shares and bonds because they can earn more after the maturity period. So this process is known as disinvestment, so that the financial requirement of the government also will be met. So this is one kind of privatization. So privatization can be done in two ways. The first method is transfer of ownership and management of public sector companies to the private sector, and the second one is selling a part of the equity of the public sector undertakings to the general public, which is known as disinvestment. Now, if the firm is under privatization, when the government is encouraging the privatization, it is transferring its ownership and control and management to the private sectors, right? Now, in that situation, the firms are given, now the private firms are given the full freedom for taking their managerial decisions. Government will not interfere. Why government is not interfering? If government is interfering, it will not help for improving the managerial efficiency. So to improve the managerial efficiency, government firms were given freedom for taking the managerial decisions. So that was main policy which was followed by the government under privatization. Government did not interfere into any of the managerial decisions made by the private firms. It was taken by themselves to improve the efficiency. Because you know the objective of the government is to improve the financial stability and to bring out modernization. So in order to fulfill that objective, the full freedom of managerial decision was given for the private firms under the process of privatization. Now next method or policy which was adopted by the government was these private firms which are now privatized, these sectors which are under the process of privatization. What is meant by privatization? Transfer of ownership, control and management of the public enterprises to the entrepreneurs in the private sector. Now, these private sectors have to develop. What is the main objective of the government? To bring out modernization and to bring out financial stability. So the government had to monitor the functioning of these private sectors because government aimed at financial stability. So for that, the government took another policy. What was that policy? These firms were awarded with a status to grade them. They were awarded with status to grade them. Let us see which are the three status given by the government to grade these firms. The three grades are Maharatnas, the second one is Navaratnas and Mini Ratnas. So these are the three status which were graded for these firms which were undergoing the process of privatization. So these are the status. According to these status, they will grade. So what is the benefit of that? These private firms will compete with themselves to come up to the first grade, that is Maharatnas, then comes Navaratna and Mini Ratnas. So these firms will compete with themselves to move on to the higher grade. So this was a status given for the private firms. So this increased their efficiency. Now let us see, as per the government status of Maharatnas, which all companies came under that. Indian Oil Corporation Limited, Steel Authority of India Limited, SAIL, Steel Authority of India Limited. Next, under Navaratnas, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, then Mahanagar Telephone Nigam Limited. That is according to Navaratnas. Then comes Mini Ratnas, are BSNL, then Airport Authority of India. All these comes under Mini Ratnas. So these these firms which were undergoing the process of privatization was given the following status so that they will try to upgrade themselves. This helped for improving their efficiency. So by the year 2017, 13th September, there was 8 Maharatnas, 16 Navaratnas and 74 Mini Ratnas. So you can see the difference. So this was a status given by the government to help the private entrepreneurs to upgrade themselves. So these were the methods. So if you search, you can find which all companies that comes under Mini Ratnas. I told you 74. By 2017, 13th September, 8 Maharatnas, 16 Navaratnas and 74 Mini Ratnas. If you are interested, you can find out which all companies comes under Maharatnas, Navaratnas and Mini Ratnas. So this is all about the privatization. So privatization means what? Transfer of control, ownership and management of government undertakings to private sector undertakings. Okay. Now we will move on to the third element of new economic policy, that is globalization. A topic which is very familiar for you because you have been learning this topic from class 10 onwards, and you are very much familiar with this topic, the definition of globalization, and you already learned in history regarding globalization, and as well as in economics. You have a full chapter with regard to globalization, but still we have to again recollect the points with related to globalization. Now, what do you know about globalization? Globalization, the third element of new economic policy, the third element of new economic policy. Globalization means integrating the national economy, suppose our economy, with the world through the removal of barriers on international trade and capital movements. Now, when India sought for the financial help from IMF and the World Bank, India got the financial help on the basis of some agreements, and one among that agreement was to remove all kinds of trade restrictions by India. Let the goods, services and people move freely from India to other parts of the world. So, let us remember that particular point when we explain globalization. So, what is meant by globalization? It means integrating the national economy, integrating our economy with the world through what? Removal of barriers. Integrate our economy with the world market by removing all kinds of trade barriers on international trade and capital movements. The trade should flow freely, the capital should flow freely, people should flow freely, and services also should move from India to other parts of the world. So, there should not be any restrictions on the movement of trade, capital, people, services, etc. So, that is how we can integrate our economy with other economy. That process is known as globalization. So, when we explain globalization in a simple term, what is meant by globalization? Economic interdependence of one country over the other. When I explained the balance of payment chapter in macroeconomics, I tried to connect, and foreign exchange, I tried to connect globalization with BOP and foreign exchange. At that time, I defined globalization as economic interdependence of one country over the other. So, let us define the globalization once again. Integrating the national economy with the world through the removal of barriers, all kinds of barriers with related to what? Trade and capital. That means there should be free movement of trade as well as capital. Thereby what will take place? Services and people also will move. Not only services and people, culture will be moving from one part of the country to the other parts of the world. Then food, that will be traveling from one country to the other country. So many things will happen in between. So, globalization means what? It means integrating our economy with the world through removing all kinds of barriers related to trade as well as capital. That means there should be a free flow of trade and capital in the economy. Remove all kinds of barriers related to trade and capital. If we remove that, globalization takes place. So, globalization was one of the most important element of new economic policy. Now, next is very important topic, changes made by globalization. With the process of globalization, what all changes were experienced in our economy? The first one is, it created a borderless world. There is no border. It created a borderless world, because I told you people, goods, services, trade, capital, everything was flowing from one country to the other country. Now, next is the new economic policy under globalization prepared a list of high technology and high investment priority industries which are permitted for FDI. What is FDI? Foreign direct investment. When I explained balance of payment, the concept of foreign direct investment was explained to you. It is one among the component of the capital account. Foreign direct investment means what? The Indian companies which can go and invest in the foreign countries, in which the profit is taken whole by the country itself. There are two types of investment, portfolio and foreign direct investment. The profit is taken by the company as a whole, by the company who is investing in the foreign countries. So, with the globalization, India tried to list out. It prepared a list of, who prepared a list? Our Indian government or Indian economy prepared a list of high technology and high investment priority industries. Why Indian economy prepared a list of high technology and high investment industries? The reason is that we are going to trade with other countries in the world. We need to produce those goods which should compete with the goods which are produced by other countries. So, we need those technology which can produce quality goods that can compete with other countries. So, our economy with the process of globalization listed some companies which requires high technology and high investment priority. We listed certain industries which need high technology and high investment. Why high investment and high technology? The reason I told you, we are going to compete with other countries in the world. The products of other countries in the world, we need good technology and we need those industries with high level of investment. Only then we can produce more within a short period of time. Then only we will be able to compete with other countries in the world. So, for that we or Indian economy prepared a list of high technology and high investment priority industries, and they were permitted to do foreign direct investment also, FDI, which means foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment is possible only through globalization, because if you want to go and make investments in foreign countries, definitely globalization process is necessary. Now, the next change under globalization, no permission is required for hiring foreign technicians or for testing the technology developed abroad. Now, no permission is required. With globalization, there is free flow of goods, services, people, capital from one part to the other part of the world. So, no permission is required for hiring a technician from abroad in order to work out the technology which we have adopted here or which we have imported from the foreign countries, or even for testing of the technology which is developed abroad. That means we are free to move from one place to another place, because definitely when we are importing the technology from other countries, we need the technical assistance. So, we were free to get the assistance from the foreign countries. So, no permission was required for hiring the technicians from outside. Now, next, adjustment was made in the Indian currency to boost up export. Whenever the government needed to adjust the exchange rate could be either increased or decreased according to the situation prevailing in the economy, which can boost up our export. Why we are boosting up the export? For balance of payment to become favorable, because you know, if the exports are more than the import, receipt will be greater than the payment. So, there is a surplus balance of payment. So, to experience surplus of balance of payment under the process of globalization, government took the measure. What measure? Adjustment in the Indian currency. Exchange rate was fluctuated by the government with the help of the Reserve Bank whenever it was necessary. Now, next, a new 5-year export-import policy, that is from year 1992 to 97, was announced by the government, which was free from all kinds of trade restrictions. Indian government during a period of 1992 to 97, a 5-year export-import policy was announced by Indian government by removing all kinds of trade restrictions. Next one is to face the global competition, the customs duty of our products were also reduced considerably. Customs duty was reduced. Our goods can be exported to other countries with a lesser cost of duty paid for it, and those goods which are coming to our country also, less duty need to be paid. So this cost for the free flow of export and import to and fro. So these were the changes made under globalization. Now let us see the changes made under globalization once again. Globalization created a borderless world. Then under globalization, our economy prepared a list of high technology and high investment priority industries to compete with the foreign products, and they were also permitted to do foreign direct investment. Next one, no permission is required for hiring the foreign technicians. Then comes adjustments were made in the Indian currency to boost up export to get a favorable balance of payment. Then a new 5-year export-import policy was adopted which removed all kinds of trade restrictions. And finally, to face the global competition, customs duty was also reduced by the government. So that's all about the introductory part of globalization. I hope it is clear to you. Thank you.